Perfect. So, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are logging in from around the country here. And thank you one and all for joining today's fireside chat with Cynet Security and Prescriptive Data Solutions. Our goal today is really to shed light on today's top challenges and opportunities facing IT and security leaders as well as their teams, specifically in the SMB space. Fortunately, we're joined by two experienced experts who can help translate insights into practical advice for y'all today. My teammate, Greg Bennett, is a senior security solutions engineer with Cynet, and John Parker is a network and security practice manager for Prescriptive Data Solutions. Prescriptive is a Cynet partner who's been making an awesome impact for their clients. They've been working with Cynet for the past few years now to help secure IT teams throughout Texas and North America. And on top of reselling Cynet, Prescriptive can also offer their clients a full range of IT and security products as well as services. So, gentlemen, really appreciate you hopping on today and giving some perspective to the folks in attendance for this fireside chat. We're really going to start the discussion today by distilling the current state of cybersecurity into three areas for discussion. Those three areas are people, platforms, and processes. To build on top of those insights, Greg will simulate a real-world threat scenario, step-by-step demonstration on how solutions like the Cynet all-in-one platform can automatically block sophisticated cyber attacks. And then any questions throughout the course of the next hour or so, please feel free to pop them in the chat here. We'll save a few minutes for Q&A towards the end of here. So, it's a packed agenda today. Again, thank you so much for everyone that's able to join. We're going to be able to send out this recording after the fact as well, but let's hop right into it. So starting with people, maybe we'll start with Greg here. What trends are you seeing shape the priorities and plans for cybersecurity leaders today?
I think a lot of it's coming down to shaping priorities, right? It's ease of use and quick of use, right? They need in cyber, minutes are days, right? And you've got to respond quickly. You have to be agile, but you have to have the right information in front of you. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things when it comes to setting the priorities, is making sure that, especially at the top level decision making process, you've got the information in front of you, correct information in front of you in a timely fashion, so that you can react accordingly.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Greg. I mean, really, we're in this fear space of all the buzzwords are out there, but the dwell time. I mean, that's really where we've had to focus the shift over to our responsiveness and getting all the right information, because if we don't know about it beforehand, right? We better know about it as quickly as it happened. And how long has it been taking from people's standpoint? You cannot have enough cybersecurity engineers at any organization, and that is definitely a deficit we all have. So going from there, when we shift those priorities around, it's really, what can we do to expedite our responsiveness, expedite our information gathering capabilities, so that we can get this resolved and remediated as quickly as possible. And people is that first level of that. You got to have the right people in the right place.
Absolutely.
I would even go so far as to say that once you have the right people in there, do they have the right mindset, right? I mean, the truth is that in IT space in general, right, we wear a lot of hats, right? I mean, one day you're a sysadmin, the next day you're a security admin, and you got to blend both those worlds in together. And when we're tackling those types of challenges with staying ultra responsive and shifting priorities around, the skill set bar is much higher than it used to be. I mean, we got to come prepared. And with that challenge in mind, how do you enable our personnel, our people that are in here doing these tasks? How do you get them to that level where they need to be? And sometimes it's not possible.
And then how do you keep them? I mean, the attrition. Once you get the person trained and you've given them everything that they need, and they're now an effective cyber warrior, they're going to parlay those skills into another job set, because some headhunter is going to come along and double their salary. And so it's you really have to know where you are in the comfort zone of the training of those people as well. There needs to be a realistic category in that.
For sure. I mean, the growth pattern, like when we set together and we put out a training program for maybe a junior person to get them up to a senior level, that path and progression, I mean, it's not short, right? It's broken into bite-sized chunks in order to enable their skill sets, and we hope that we're laying it on top of a foundation that's super solid, right? Those foundational skills that tie into being cyber people. But we also know that we can't always have everyone be in cyber. Everyone has to have a day job on the other side of it, the
Right.
day-to-day operations of systems for sure, and cyber is there to support it. I mean, that's where certain aspects of our job really rely on some of the other P's that we're going to talk about here shortly.
Yep. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And before we move over into platforms here, I'd like to bring up a point that I'm seeing in the chat. How can folks in the SMB space leverage different frameworks such as NIST to provide a more structured and practical approach to cybersecurity?
Go for it, John.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a loaded question on that
I
side
know,
for
right?
sure.
Like the way I sidestep that.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with this because it's a standard, right? And it's a approved approach by everyone in the industry, whether or not that's the path you choose. I would say the first thing is enabling your team to understand what those standards and practices really are inside of it. When you're building up, your cybersecurity program as a whole, right? Having the right people in there is the first step of it. Getting them trained up to where they need to be. But when the framework gets applied to everything we do, from the processes, the solutions, and so on, the people have to understand what each one of those segments mean, right? Like, how do you tackle this task or process in order to meet this level of compliance? And there's a little bit of a gray area in understanding and interpreting that from a policy standpoint. Like, okay, I need to accomplish, let's say, multi-factor authentication. Well, great, we'd use multi-factor for our authentication, but do we use it for every aspect of our identity when we're logging in? So making sure that our team members understand that when we talk about this particular task, when we're trying to solve it, when it applies to something like NIST, is you have to look at it holistically. And that's where that knowledge and having your people trained up to where they need to be at can tackle this. And again, we're trying to solve that deficit by having all the right resources in the right place.
Yeah, and definitely it's the understanding, and you're absolutely right. That gray area is depending on the compliance. I mean, it gets wide there because a lot of interpreting those things. I mean, it's part science, but it's part art, because you have to understand if it says that you need log aggregation. All right, but what does that mean? I mean, are you using it to sift? Are you using correlation conditions to match for alerting purposes, or are you just looking for a JBOD sitting off in the corner that's just collecting a bunch of syslogs? There's that interpretation that you have to understand, and that's where, yes, you can have your people, you can train your people, you can give them a phone book sized, you know, how-to manual, but really partnering with somebody that understands the compliance, that has gone through CMMC reviews or audits, that really to help navigate and answer those questions. I have multi-factor authentication. Is that enough? Right. Being able to have those conversations in honest real time gives you the ability to sleep a little better at night. I mean, it I wish it were those days where all we had to worry about was the bad guy sitting over in the corner trying to steal our stuff. But now we're also worried about regulatory compliance, where we can be fined or we can be found negligent for not putting something in place, right? That it really puts organizations, especially small businesses, in between a rock and a hard place. It's unfortunate, but there are organizations like Cynet. We can come along with the technology, right? We'll probably transition to here platforms in just a minute, but we can provide the technology. But then we also have partners like Prescriptive that can help in those compliance conversations, where you can really have an eye-opening but enlightening and educating the conversation around what's important, what's applied, what's real, right? And how much is just smoke and mirrors.
Absolutely, Greg. And to that point around coming in there with the right platform, and if you don't have the right people, educating them, right? And it needs to be in a way that is not lecturing or anything like that. It's very
Right.
informative, because with all these governance compliance that exist out there, there's no way to stay on top of that when you're just trying to run your business. I'm trying to make sure that we're making money and we keep our doors open, things like that. Relying on a trusted partner to come in there and say, this is what you need, and let me explain it to you in layman's terms, and how do you accomplish this task? And maybe we can't solve everything overnight. It's just not possible. But let's build out a roadmap for your long-term success in this space.
I want to jump on something that you just hit on. You're not going to solve it overnight, right? And I think that's an expectation that needs to be set. It's not flipping a light switch. You're not just all of a sudden going from dark to light. There needs to be a path. There needs to be, you need to identify your priorities. You need to roadmap that priority set, and you need to set realistic expectations of those goals, those mile markers, right? Um, if you try to do everything on the same weekend, A, something's going to fail. B, you're going to give yourself a heart attack, right? So having a realistic expectation of, where we are currently today, and that's probably one of the most important pieces, is just sitting down and identifying, where am I today, right? Honestly, and then taking, a hard look in the mirror, identifying those gaps, and then mapping those gaps over a timeline, and setting those priorities. You put that in play, you're well ahead of probably what 60-70% of the other organizations that are out there, because most people are just kind of focusing on keeping the lights on, paying their bills, doing their business, which is important, obviously. But if you have that in mind, where if you do know that you have a compliance regulatory standard that you have to be beholden to, identifying where you're at and where you're headed, that's a key component. And most auditors, I will say this, if you have a plan, are going to be more forgiving. They're going to have grace, right? It's when the auditor walks in and says, "Show me that you're compliant," and you say, "I don't know what you're talking about," that's going to be an awkward conversation. But if you can show them, "Here we are. This is the phase that we're working on, and these are the next 3 phases that we're going to use to complete," they're much more forgiving on that.
Oh, absolutely. I've run into that so many times where, we're helping to identify those gaps, to your point, and as long as we've provided that awareness, the knowledge of the risk that you have in your environment, when the auditor comes in and you're able just to hand that over to them, it's like, we know where we're at. Here's the evidence. Here's what we're planning on doing. It changes the entire tone of the assessment, right, that you're going through, and it
Yep.
feels less like a burden, more like, I'm prepared for this, I'm ready, let's go through this. And
Yeah.
it changes that entire feeling for sure. I would even go so far as to say that, on the subject of people and on the auditing side of it, almost every one of these compliance standards out there is somewhere around, to your point earlier, log aggregation, but then even leading further into SOC analysis. And if we're already having a deficit in getting dedicated cybersecurity engineers into an organization that specializes on the day-to-day, security of the environment, the second half of that is, who's looking at the logs, like who's actually taking a look at it
Yeah.
and letting us know when something takes place. And that's where our partnership with Cynet and our customers' partnership there, I mean, that's been a game changer for all of us.
Great. Let's take a minute here to transition over to platforms and the technology. So how would you say that IT and security leaders can assess which technologies might best fit their needs? It's such a convoluted market, and there's a lot of terms and acronyms being thrown out there. Sometimes it's hard to kind of get your ducks aligned and know which vendors to reach out to, and really how to build a security tech stack that can fit your needs. As these IT leaders are going into budgetary meetings and planning ahead, as you mentioned when we were talking about the people aspect, how can they best plan to help reduce risk in their environment and ensure complete visibility?
Yeah, and I think, again, I mean, that kind of dovetails into part of the conversation we're having with compliance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knowing your gaps, knowing where to start. Now, I'm an old network designer from years ago, so we've moved away from just the hardened shell of a castle walls nowadays, although there's still a lot out there. But the perforated network wall is a real thing. With COVID, work from home, remote, all of these things, it has exploded over the last couple of years. I distinctly remember having conversations with people in 2019 that swore with their hand on a stack of Bibles that they would never allow their workers to work from home. Right. Fast forward 12 months, everybody's working from home, right? And so the landscape changes so quickly. You have to be nimble enough to do that, but in order to do that, you have to know where you're at. So identification of the gaps, definitely, right? And then understanding where you're going to start, right? It's exceedingly rare that I walk into a conversation where they at least don't have something, right? There's some form of security somewhere in their environment. If it's, whatever, even if it's just old school signature based 1990s signature AV, right? But there's something at least there to begin with. So there's always a starting spot. Then it's a matter of saying, okay, well, is that enough? Is the native OS algorithm or the native OS security going to do enough for you? Or is that, McAfee subscription, oh, I shouldn't say names, is that other legacy signature based platform enough for you? Or do you need something with a little more modern, right? I mean, one of the things that I harp on, I can't stand the phrase next gen AV, right? And mainly because it's not next gen, right? Next gen makes it sound like it's the future of coming. If you haven't had a machine learning algorithm or heuristic or behavior analysis or something of that nature, where if you haven't had that in the last couple of years, I'd I'd be shocked if you haven't been breached, right? With the analysis or the threats that we have today, and I'm just going to throw out a couple rock stars, but Emotet, right? Emotet was a rehydrated credential harvester that turned into a super Uber. Basically, it was an Uber platform for malfeasance and nefarious behavior, right? And that's what they became. They were constantly evolving because they were constantly changing their payload. I think we saw at peaks of, well, I won't say peaks, in average, uh, 450 updates a day for the Emotet. Uh, you can't have a signature based platform and survive that, right? You have to have machine learning. You have to have next gen AV platforms. Otherwise, you're just a sitting duck. I, you got to have those.
I agree. And to your point about next gen AV, we're just really, it's the modern approach. It's the day, this is what we need today, right? It's to your point, it's not the cutting edge. We have to have this today in our
Yeah.
environment to stay safe. And why do we do this? Well, let's go back a little bit in time to talk about where do you focus your risk and your priorities and everything like that. Historically speaking, we thought, to your castle analogy, we had the firewall at the edge, right? That was our ingress egress. We had our AV on our endpoint to protect the endpoint because that's where our users were. That's where people were downloading files to. And then of course we had to have some sort of email security because that was and still is the highest form of attack vector because of the fact that no
Preach.
business operates without email, right? If we had to your point, walk-in environment, more than likely you had one or if not all three of those in your environment, and that was great, right? I mean, you had your walls, you had your castle up and stuff like that, but then the game changed, right? We're not able to keep up with the modern, approach to cyber attacks with legacy technologies, which also meant that our defense in depth strategy had to change, right? We're no longer focusing on these three pinpoint locations. The big thing that's happening right now is that, and I think everybody's kind of on board with this, is everything's tied to identity, right? Identity is what we're going after. And even with things like multi-factor authentication, some sort of conditional access, location awareness, all these different pieces, we have to layer all that in together to say, we got to protect that identity. And what are the mechanisms of doing that? And beyond that, looking at the risk, that's where we start at, right? Is what is the risk to the identity? And that should pave the path to understanding what are your gaps in your solution stack, right? From a security standpoint, or even to the processes piece of it, because how do we do this, right? Defining those things. How do we protect identity? And if we have the right pure play EDR, MDR, SOC solution that's protecting our endpoint, that's that modern approach to endpoint security, and tying that into network log aggregation, pulling in those feeds, using heuristics, all of these pieces tied in together, that ties into how we protect identity more than just, MFA. MFA is now a standard, right? You can't not have it in today's environment. But because it's a standard, where do we go next, right? Because if we're accepting that as this is what we need to have, what is the rest of the modern security solution stack that we have to adapt to keep up with these threats that are constantly emerging? And that's where I spend a lot of my time having conversations with building that roadmap, understanding your risks inside of your environment so that you know where you need to focus at. And let's figure out together what the right solution and platform that's going to solve this. And sometimes it's a bunch of different answers, and other times it's like we need to consolidate this down because we need true information source, like a single source of truth coming back in and telling us this is where the problem is. Let's solve it now. And that's ultimately where we're trying to drive to, especially in the SMB space, where we can't have 1,000 different security solutions deployed in there. And I picked a large number. It's, we'll call it 10, 15. Sometimes we need to have 5, right? 4 that really protect us on as many fronts as possible so that we know exactly where to go to solve that problem when it does come up, when that incident does take place. And they're protecting us both proactively and reactively, because you have to have both. It's not just one or the other. If you're always reactive, you're always behind the curve. So you have to have the proactive means of putting up your safeguards. Same thing of the castle mentality. You got to have your walls, your moat, all that stuff. That's the proactive approach. And then you need everything else, the people running behind it, making sure that the walls are safe.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And now we're getting to a place where you can have those different disparate points of view, I guess. But now, how do I take what I'm seeing over here and what I'm seeing over here and smash them together to give me context around what the heck is going on in my world, right? Because you have to be able to see that context in order to determine if John Doe is misbehaving, right? Is he straying into areas that he shouldn't be doing? Or, you talk about identity, and we've almost entered the digital age of, papers, please, right? But we're doing it in the land of ones and zeros, right? We're doing it where we can be checked to identify ourselves to prove that we have identity or that we're allowed to be there, right? Now there's a whole sub conversation that can happen in that, but where we can start pulling in context around, logs from your firewalls, notifications via email or from your email, not via email, from your email, looking at your security posture, looking at the host as a whole, looking at the network transmissions that are being read on the wire, looking at your user notifications, right? Taking all of that context and blending it together into a single pane of glass, if you will, so that you can sit back and see the mosaic as it's supposed to be, right? And get a good picture of the threat of the landscape, especially for SMBs, because you don't have a dedicated team of 12 to run security 24/7, 365, right? You've generally got, a lot of times you've got one guy who, is running around like a chicken with his head cut off. He hasn't had a vacation in 5 years, because if he goes on vacation, who's going to keep the network up, right? And so it's almost, I'm trying not to use the phrase set and forget, because that's not fair. I mean, but you almost want something that you can have faith, you can have true faith in, that will protect you and notify you of something if it's wrong, and not send you, and this is, I guess, the other half, not send you down a rabbit trail of false positives, right? Because if I'm getting notified, 7 times a day that something's wrong, but it turns out that it's about twice a month that it's actually something wrong. I'm going to stop it. I'm going to start ignoring that flashing red light, right? And that's a whole different set of problems, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that when you kind of look at it that way, what is the right platform for making that decision, right? I mean, that's a very strong argument, because I don't want something that's sitting in a bunch of false positives. I want real analytics behind it, so I get real alerts to me when I know I need to take
Right.
an action. And Michael asked about this, right? Which is, how does someone make that decision? Well, we talked about it before. Compliance standards are a big driver behind that. You know, what's going to protect us from the most commonly used attack vectors that are out there? Like I said before, email security was the answer for email, right? I mean, we were blocking
Right.
that, but that was a point solution answer to that. When we tie it all together, we got to look at all of it, and what are the various attack vectors that are used, and do we see that as we're stitching all of this together into one, I guess a weave, right? Or however you want to look at that. When we look at this entire path, what's taking place, and are these indicators of compromise that we're looking at different levels. And I think that makes it a lot easier to make a decision when you're looking at solving it from a tool perspective, a platform. I need something that's going to do that for me, right? And that's because I can't put my resources out there to try to do this manually. I need a very streamlined, automated approach to do that. And I think that's what sets that path when we're looking at a platform to solve these types of problems for our users out there.
For you, it's one thing for an IT or security leader to make a decision. It's a whole nother battle to get that decision approved. What insight or advice would you give to the IT director that has his roadmap planned out, not formally, and is having trouble convincing the rest of the business for additional budget, additional resources for him to live out his dream and execute on the roadmap that he has planned ahead, he or she?
Well, I would like to say that's easy for me to say, but I'll start with the simple answer, which is, what would happen if you didn't have this, right? If you start with that approach, if I didn't do these things, and we're talking about risk, right? That's ultimately what it all comes down to. If you know what the risk means, then it should be easy at least to convey that message, right? Here's what would happen if we didn't go down this path. If we didn't follow my roadmap that I'm presenting, to leadership, here's our risk, and here's what would cost us. If you can, and that's a hard thing to quantify sometimes from a business perspective, is if all of our services went down for one day, what does that cost of business from a financial perspective, but also from business reputation, brand, those parts. And again, it's hard to quantify all this, but if you can at least make that relatable, that translates very well to the business leaders when you're going to try to get budget. Beyond that, I would say that it really ties into, what can I do more of with less, right? And what I'm really trying to say is there an answer in here where, for my roadmap, if I do this one thing, it solves 3 or 4 problems, right? So I'm able to take our level up so much higher by solving this one issue from a platform, process, or ultimately a solution perspective, right? I want to implement this because it's going to move our security posture up this. And if you can quantify that on a rating scale, which is often a big challenge with, like, what's our access level from a 1 to 5, what from an access security posture standpoint, what's our protection on identity, you start quantifying those things and you say, here's where we're at today, and this is where it will be after this, in really simple, like, number or colors or whatever way you want to look to present it. I mean, that's the idea, is you want to make it
Red
very
is
simple to
bad.
follow. Yeah, exactly. But you take those 2 approaches, it solves the vast majority of it. Now, sometimes you're never going to be able to overcome budget, and the next idea beyond that is, okay, what can we do to offset this, right? Is there something else? And I hate saying the word sacrifice, but unfortunately sometimes that's the case, because if this risk is higher than this other thing that we've solved for, maybe there's somewhere we can move in. Or Tool consolidation is another approach, right? So I'm giving a bunch of ideas on how I've had to help, IT leaders solve these problems with those types of things. Budget constraints is always a big challenge, though, and that's how we overcome them.
Yeah, and I think one of the, I don't want to sound like the ambulance chaser, right? Or have that insurance conversation, right? But there is always, everyone knows somebody who's been breached in one form or another. Especially when you start sharing conversations around historicals and things of that nature. When you're sitting around the IT bar sharing a beer with your buddies, there's the guy that's down the street that's in your same industry, and his HAVAC supplier or partner got breached, which then led to them, right? So it's not always a direct approach. I mean, kind of pulling them out of the history books here, but that's how Target got hit. What was that? However many years ago that was, but their HVAC provider had a signal system into their HVAC units that were sitting at its store. They got hit, which then led to Target. The attackers weren't even looking for Target. They weren't. They were splash collateral at that point. Now, as an attacker, that's some pretty magnificent splash collateral. You think you're going after mom and pop shop HVAC unit, and you end up with Target for 4 years. That's not a bad turnaround, but
Absolutely. And and to your point on that side, that's a perfect segue into process, right? Because
yes,
sometimes the answer is not always platform or people, but we need better processes that protect us in that, especially in the
yeah,
supply chain side.
absolutely. And the processes that I think, and maybe processes is where you start, because that's something you already have.
Mhm.
What are the processes that you currently have in play? Are you doing backups? Are you checking those backups? Right. That's a big miss in a lot of organizations. Yeah, I've got backups. We've been doing backups for the last 10 years. We got them all in a secure. Okay, so have you ever tried to rehydrate one of those? Oh no. And then they go to do it, find out the data's corrupted. Right. Now what are you going to do? Right. So those are the processes that keep you safe, right? What are you doing today? What are the processes that you're incorporating today that are routine, right? The fire drill, right? Um, Hire someone to pen test you, right? Now, again, I'm a security dork, right? So that's where my mind goes, right? But hire somebody to try and breach you, and then find out what's your castle wall, right? To bring that full circle, find out how hard your castle wall is, and if it is solid, good. Now let's do this. Let's bring him in house, right? Let's do an assume to breach model, right? And let them play with that. Okay. So there are processes that can be utilized and taken advantage of to really bring it home.
Absolutely. And I mean, the two that immediately come to mind, and you hit on one of them, is your DR process, right? What does that look like from testing your backups to making sure that you could survive whatever incident takes place? And that leads to the precursor to that, which is your incident response plan, right? What happens when an incident takes place? Have you gone through reviewing that plan, tabletopping it, right? Going through and the scenarios to say, does this plan actually work for us? Because this is entirely process oriented. Yeah, it's built on tools, it's built on people, but if we don't have this process down packed to where this plan is solid, we're going to run into an issue the moment we go to enact it. And that's the time where you don't want to, you want everything
Right.
to go as smoothly as possible. You don't want any bumps. It's
Yep.
already a rocky road to begin with after an incident.
Yeah, not to be cliche, but failure to plan is plan to fail, right? And if it and practice, right? There's a number of communities I'm part of that they will say it's never a matter of stepping up. You will always perform at your lowest level of training, right? So run those scenarios. Pretend for a moment that you've been breached. What are you going to do? How are you going to react? What are the next steps? Are you going to run to the next machine and just start pulling cables out of the wall, or do you have something that you can respond to perform isolation, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So
And
Do your
I
tools
think
work?
the tabletop exercises are something that oftentimes gets skipped in the SMB space because the IT teams, at least that I've been working with throughout my time at Cynet, just so many projects going on at once where it seems like there might not be enough time in the day to perform a tabletop. But, going to the point I made about going out and seeking approval for this additional budget or, approval for your roadmap, running those tabletops is definitely an exercise that can open the eyes of the suits upstairs sitting in the C-suite that, hey, this might be, something that we actually need to invest into because it could be really detrimental to the organization if this was to happen. I think it's an often overlooked aspect of, maturing your security program is running those tabletop exercises.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you could easily identify and going through, just pick a random scenario and you tabletop it. If the process fails, you can stop right there and say, how do we fix this? Is this ultimately a process problem? Is this a people problem? Is it a platform problem? And then you just opened up the gateway to solving this. And then let's say you fix it right there on the fly because maybe it wasn't identified or whatever it was, continue on. And then you get to the next one and you should be able to red mark every spot where you had to stop because there was some amount of uncertainty. And if that uncertainty exists, this is the time to review, right? Go back and figure it out. And to your point, Michael, go take the leadership. It's like, we got a hole. It's got to be fixed immediately. And this is the answer to do it. And I'll show you because you should be documenting that, right? When you're going through
Mhm.
your tabletop, you're documenting everything that you're doing, like kind of checking the boxes. Okay, here's everything we did. Oh, there's the big red circle. If we hit this, this is a showstopper for whatever reason.
Right.
And you could quantify the impact to the business at that point. So
And
it's good.
that's the big one right there. You can quantify it, right? You can say, okay, not only is this a gap, but what is this going to cost us? And not cost us to fix it, right? What is the opportunity cost to not fixing it, right? It, again, to your point, right? To your reputation, our downage, right? If you have a web presence and you're selling your services or goods on a 24/7 basis, if you're down for an hour and a half, how much money does that cost you, right?
Mhm.
Um, things of that nature, where you can really sit and you can start putting dollar signs next to those red marks. That's going to make that conversation to get budget pretty quick.
Absolutely.
Great. Um, so I think we're coming up on time here. Thank you both for unpacking how people, platforms, or the right platforms and efficient processes can, combine and lead to positive effects towards the organization. One key point that we spoke about here today is how small and medium-sized businesses can look for platforms that can help make their teams faster and more accurate. In today's world, let's face it, that means automation. Greg here is going to be able to open up the Cynet platform for us today, and we're going to run a live attack simulation. Open it up, poke it with a stick, and we're going to see all the actions that Cynet's going to be able to take on your behalf here. So happy
Yeah,
to jump into the demonstration portion of the fireside chat here.
yeah, we can definitely do that. I love talking with guys like John, just because
Me too.
like-minded conversations, right? The downfall of that is we can get a little lost in time, and we've got 5 minutes left. So running an entire attack simulation in 5 minutes is not going to be easy. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the console and show at a very high level. And if anyone that is listening to this, that's attending this, if you want to see more, if you want to know more, if you want to see the attack sim, all I ask for is an hour. Let's find some time on the calendar. Let's schedule something, and we'll walk through it in a case by case basis. More than happy to make myself available to do that. However, that being said, let me share my screen. So at a high level, this is the platform that Cynet offers that really takes care of 2 out of the 3 Ps that we were already talking about, right? The people aspect of it, We are very easy to use. We do that on purpose. We are strong believers that if you are opening up the owner's manual every time that you crack open your console, your solution's too complicated. Okay. Um, so that being said, we focus on an intuitive console. I firmly believe that I could drop this into the lap of an IT admin, and in 10 minutes they'll get to 80% of what they're looking for. Right? There's always going to be a 20% nuance, but that's going to have that possibility. But at a high level, to kind of talk about some of the other things as far as the platform and processes that we were talking about. Uh, for us at Cynet, we're looking at and maintaining security around endpoint security. So we are agent based. We go down to the hosts, and we protect the devices. And we're looking at what we consider the 360 view. So we're looking at files, we're looking at the memory stack, we're looking at the user interactions, we're looking at the network. And what we're doing is protecting that device against malfeasance and malicious threats. So within the endpoint section of it, you can see the alert trend lines. You can see the categories, how many open alerts are currently in the environment, things like that. We're also looking at your SaaS and security posture management, so your SaaS applications. Here, we're taking a look at the configuration of your SaaS applications, and then we're comparing those to a list of compliance regulation standards that we're following. So think ISO 27001, PCI DSS, NIST, HIPAA, CIS. There's a nice laundry list in there that we're comparing them to. But we're going to be able to take a look and see where the configuration of your Office 365 or your Okta or your Salesforce doesn't jive with that compliance standard. So if you're beholden to HIPAA, we can show you where an auditor will come in and say here, 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 and here, right? I like to think of it as the get the auditor out of my office tool, because you can proactively look at where your weaknesses might be and start plugging those up. On the email side, we're looking for Office 365 accounts and Gmail to come soon. We're looking at inbound mail transmission. So it's an API-based solution. So as it comes in, it hits Office 365. They turn it and send it to us, and we interrogate that message. Right? We're using our machine learning algorithms and our detection engines and all the things, and we're looking at attachments, links, QR codes, all the fun stuff. Right? If we find something that we don't like, we simply quarantine it, or we can do a couple other things. If it's perfectly fine, we send it back to Office 365 for delivery, right? Nice and easy. Now, the XDR side of life, this is where we're looking at, well, we can ingest third-party log information and make determinations. So we can ingest logs from firewalls, switch stacks, wireless controllers, even SaaS applications, right? And we can take those logs, and we've have correlation conditions that we've written under the hood so that we can notify you of impossible travel or suspicious logins or brute force attacks against your VPN on your firewall. Because we are ingesting those logs and seeing that transmission, we can piece things together automatically using AI and a couple other things that we can say, hey, that's not good, right? And we can bubble that up to your attention and give you the alert and the information that you need in order to react accordingly. Now, ultimately, it comes down to automation, much like John and I were talking about, right? Minutes in cyber are days, might as well be. So, if we can shrink that exposure surface, or that timeline, that's really what we're looking to do. So when it comes to automation, we're looking at things like actions that were automatically executed, or alerts that were auto remediated, playbooks that may have run and been able to shut doors and alert notifications of emails and admins, and there's a lot of things that we can do in there automatically. But then how many hours has my team spent doing other things rather than the care and feeding of the security solution, right? And this is kind of where I was saying before, I'm trying to avoid the set and forget, but at the same time, if I don't need to be in here, I don't want to be in here. I've got 1,000 other things that I have to take care of, right? So why not allow the solution to run an autonomous response and automatically keep you safer than you were yesterday, kind of a thing. Now that's at a very high level. Obviously, I'm just touching the admin dashboard here. I would love to be able to show off the rest of the platform. Reach out to us, give us a call. I'd be more than happy to sit down on an individual basis and walk through this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we wanted to build in some time here for Q&A. Looks like we are coming up on time, but one question that we got in the chat here that I want to make sure we hit, because it does align with the people aspect of our conversation at the start of this. Many risks that we're talking about are from, the hacker cliche, someone with a hoodie, shadow character trying to access your environment. A lot of the risks that these, folks that we're chatting with are coming from risks that are caused by colleagues and people inside of your organization. And I think this might relate to an aspect of the platform that we didn't touch on during that quick overview, which would be our user behavior aspect of it. But could you talk a little bit about insider threats and how folks in the SMB space can help protect against their biggest assets, which is the people working for them?
Absolutely. I can jump on that real quick.
Yeah.
The first thing I'll say is that while insider threats, we kind of break it into two categories. This is my perspective. There's the accidental side, right, that happens. And it's going to happen no matter what. And we do everything we can to enable our people by training, awareness, all that kind of stuff, but stuff still happens. So we need to definitely be able to protect them from when that takes place. And they're susceptible. I mean, take a phishing attack as a good example of this. I mean, if it looks real and you're not looking at the domain name or whatever else, you click on it, I mean, it happens, right? It's gonna, so you have that side of it. And then of course, the other side of it is the malicious side. Maybe they're unhappy, maybe they're leaving, whatever it is, and they're doing something that's either going to do intentional damage to your environment, or they're trying to just act outside of character and steal data, whatever it is, right? I mean, whatever that is, that's going to ultimately cause damage. And in those two areas, right, how do you ultimately say which is which and how do we protect against it? And I don't think that you have to necessarily differentiate in your response from a automation platform protection piece of it, but you have to be able to address both and understand what they are. And understanding how the user behaves on a daily basis is a key part of that. Because if I'm just opening an email and I click on something, well, that's probably accidental, right? I mean, that's just going to happen. Whereas all of a sudden somebody goes and starts accessing files that they've never accessed before, they haven't accessed in 5 years, or these are like relic archive files that are back here in the back and that no one's going. It's like Indiana Jones kind of thing, right? And they're going and getting them out. No, that's suspicious. We should be calling that out and be able to call out on that user behavior because it's just unlike them. And that's really where something like Cynet has a powerful integration into that, understanding what's outside the norm, what's abnormal for our users and their behavior.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna. I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. The only thing that I would say is, I used to joke, I can make you and design you a 100% impenetrable network. It would be perfect. It would be completely secure, and you'd never be able to penetrate it, hack it, get anywhere near it until you put a human behind it. And now, and once you put a user on the line, all bets are off the window, right?
Game
And
over.
yeah, game over. It's users are going to do user things, right? And it's to your point, the accidental, right? Oh, I didn't realize that didn't come from my grandmother. It looked so legitimate, but it's that understanding, like you said, it's that pivot point, right? Where does it go from accidental to malicious, right? And understanding and having visibility to that, it is key, so that you can differentiate that, and so that you can know, is this a training opportunity I have with John Doe, or is this an HR conversation I'm going to have, right? Yeah, you have to have that information, and that's kind of, I guess that kind of comes full circle, right? Knowing what you know, identifying your gaps, and providing visibility into what you need in order to make the decisions that you need to make.
Absolutely.
Great, great. And Greg, before we hop off here and bid adieu, I want to cover one more aspect of the Cynet platform and offering that can really be a huge advantage for some of the IT leaders that we're working with. Could you quickly, at a high level, share a little bit about what our SOC team does
Mm.
for these Cynet clients?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a key point, right? Especially when you're dealing with, if you don't have your own 24/7 employees that are sitting at a desk that you chain, um, we do, right? And that's just part of our DNA. It's just part of who we are. It's our off the shelf offering, if you will. We are backed by a 24/7, 365 managed detection response center, and they are Cynet badged employees. We don't outsource it. They sit in a room and they stare at glass for 3 shifts a day, right? Um, Anything that produces a high or critical severity event on any system that we are looking at or that we are protecting, our SOC gets notified, right? So we're triaging that right along with you. Now, of course, the admin is going to get a email notification and it's going to show up in their console and they can triage it all day long. But at the same time, we are also notified. We're also triaging it. We're also looking at it. And 99 times out of 100, perfectly honest, we may look at it and say, oh, well, the agent did what it was supposed to do. No harm, no foul, right? You might get an email from us that says, hey, something happened. The agent did these things. Sleep well at night, right? But having those eyes on glass, having that safety net, if you will, if we see multiple high severity alerts happen in the same environment at a very short period of time, or if we see something egregious like a ransomware event,
Oh,
we're going to be on it and we're going to call and we're going to say, hey, these are our observations. These are our assumptions. Let us off the leash and we'll go in and we will do those IR performances, right? We will perform actions. We can take actions as needed so that we can get that back into a healthy state of being, right? So that is a huge advantage for us, having those individuals that they sit there, they eat, sleep, breathe security. It's they're not running around and trying to do network admin stuff and database admin stuff and changing toner cartridges. They are solely devoted to their life of security. So it's a great asset and a nice safety net to have in your back pocket.
Absolutely. Awesome. And before we break for the afternoon and go back to our day-to-day activities, John, why don't you let the audience know what following up with prescriptive data solutions could provide? You know, the services that prescriptive can provide to some of these IT folks on the call today.
absolutely. And we've touched on a lot of really good points on there, which is understanding your risk, putting a plan together, understanding how to build all this out and in bite-sized chunks, building that roadmap. That's the key to our initial service engagement with any customer is we need to help you understand what you're missing and plan it out. And then beyond that, that ties into mapping out the right platform, right? Helping you find the right people. Us being maybe it's us being the right people. We have an entire managed services offering that can tie in to supplement those areas where you don't have the right resources on there. So it expands very quickly, but from the security perspective, the first part is really helping understand where your needs are so that we can deliver on that, right? Because beyond that, it's not solving any problems. If you don't know what the problem is, then how can anybody help you, right? So that's the first piece on there that we do every time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we highly encourage folks in the audience today to reach out to myself, John, anyone on the Cynet or prescriptive teams to get, whether it's talking with John about running security audits, kind of gap assessments in your environment or things of that nature, or if you do have any upcoming EDR, endpoint protection, XDR, or overall security projects that you think Cynet might be a good fit for, we'd be happy to kind of walk through that day in the life of a Cynet user or a prescriptive data client here. highly, highly recommend to reach out. Like Greg mentioned, an hour of your time, we'll be able to walk through the platform, do a simulated attack, show you the automation that will come into play and really save up some time in your days when it comes to your environment. But that being said, I wanted to thank everybody that was able to join today's discussion. I really did think that Greg and John put on a fantastic performance. So cheers to you guys. Definitely a lot of expertise and great insights that were shared today. And again, thank you to everyone who was able to join today. Now, I do believe that this conversation has been recorded. If there's any tidbits that you'd like to circle back on or rewatch, I'd be happy to share this with you individually. Like I mentioned, feel free to just reach out. I'll throw my email as well as Greg and John's in the chat here so you have a method of communication. But again, thank you for joining today and enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays.
Appreciate it. Thanks.